Last Thursday, 10 Republican candidates squared off in the first presidential debate. In the post-debate roundup, many are saying the first-time contender Mitt Romney emerged as the clear winner. Joining us now, former Massachusetts governor and 2008 presidential candidate Mitt Romney. Governor, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thanks, Alan. Good to be with you.
You spoke with Pat Robertson's Regent University just a couple of days ago. He, on his website of the Christian Broadcasting Network, another entity that Robertson has, says, how do I recognize a cult? Says when it comes to spiritual matters, Mormons are far from the truth. Do you have a problem with Pat Robertson saying that about your faith?
No, I think there are differences between different faiths in this country, and there will be battles between different religions. But what I'm pleased about is that Pat Robertson invited me to speak at Regent University, not because he accepts the teachings of my church, but because he believes that the values that I have are values that he shares and that his student body can learn from. That's the great thing about this country. We don't decide who's going to be in office based on what church they go to.
Right, but I hope he wouldn't do that. But he seems negative toward your faith. I don't think anybody should be judged on their faith in terms of running for office.
Well, I agree with that, and I think he would agree with you as well. I think he'd say, I don't agree with the Mormon Church's doctrine, but he'd say, I certainly agree with the values of people like Mitt Romney and other members of his faith that they're doing their best to follow it.
You know, the abortion issue keeps coming up, and you were pro-Roe versus Wade, upholding it as governor of Massachusetts. You said just a couple of years ago you had a change of heart about abortion. What happened? Because you earlier had said that a botched abortion in your family had you wanting to uphold Roe versus Wade. You then said a couple of years ago you had a change of heart. Could you help us understand what specifically it was that made you change your view on that?
Well, first, what I find interesting is, had I been pro-life and then changed to pro-choice, no one would ask the question.
That's a great point.
But it's if you go the other direction, as I have, and as Ronald Reagan did, and Henry Hyde, and George Herbert Walker Bush, it's like the media can't get enough of why did you change? This must be.
Well, people think it's because it's an election year conversion.
But no one ever asks that if they go the other way. There's always like, oh, well, you've come to the side of light. Well, the truth is that being governor, and before I was governor, this is something I thought about. We discussed as a family. I discussed with my staff. We talked about the concerns, and the point where it sort of went over the edge for me, and of course it's didn't just come up for the first time, but went over the edge as we were having this debate on cloning, and I could see where the Roe v. Wade devaluation of human life had led. It had led to a point where people were beginning to say, hey, now we're going to start cloning embryos. It's like, wait a second, this really is going too far.
Can you understand when people would say, you know what, Mitt Romney had these views as governor of Massachusetts, now all of a sudden he wants a Republican nomination, and now look at the way he's changed his positioning on gay rights when you once said he'd be better for gay rights than Ted Kennedy?
I got the same position. I got this. You may find some small differences, but I have the same position. I'm not for discrimination against gays. I've never supported gay marriage. No, I've always been somebody who said, look, we need to have marriage as a relationship between a man and a woman. But with regards to the issue on abortion, I've been governor 4 years. You don't have to take my word for it. You can look at what I did as a governor. And as a governor, I came down on the side of life. On every piece of legislation that came my way, I was on the side of life. So it's not just taking my word for it. It's what I've done.
Hey, Governor, good to see you. Welcome back.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
Appreciate you being here. Well, you got some good news today. You got a WBZ poll among Like Survey USA. You are in the lead in the important primary state of New Hampshire. That's got to make you feel good today.
It does feel good. You know, I spend most of my time in the early primary states, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Michigan, Florida, and those are not randomly chosen. For someone like me, who's a governor, not terribly well known nationwide, you start off in the early primary states, you get known there.
When I last interviewed you some short time ago, that was one of the questions I asked you. I said 50% of people at that time, respondents, didn't know who you were yet. And you said, not to worry, let not your heart be troubled. You feel confident. Now people are beginning to know you.
Well, they're beginning to know me, but not very well. Even the 50% who know me say, yeah, I've heard of him, but I don't know him well. But, you know, by the time January comes around, I will be very well known.
Well, I'll even be Salt Lake City on Friday. You're a rock star out there.
Oh, that's good to hear.
After you work on the Olympics, I can tell you that. You know, the defining issue, Governor, of our time is this war. And look, I'm a very opinionated talk show host, and I think Democrats are waving the white flag. I think they are surrendering. I think they're emboldening our enemy. And I think they're undermining the morale of our troops. For example, when Harry Reid says the war is lost.
Huge error. Just an outrageous thing for him to have said. I'm sure he wishes he could take the words back. And if he doesn't wish it, shame on him.
Are they waving the white flag?
Well, they're setting a date for defeat, and that's a mistake. But they're capitalizing on something that we have to understand. And that is the American people feel that this has not gone like they had it represented to them. they thought we were going to be in and out, and then it turns out it hasn't worked at all as they had expected. We were underprepared, we were underplanned, understaffed, undermanaged, and there's a lot of anger about how it's not gone like they thought it would. That being said, pulling out right now has some additional risks for our country that we have to think about.
Right.
And those risks are the reason why I support the surge.
It's interesting because you talk about, very frankly and openly, some of the differences you have with the president about the war and maybe some of the specificity in terms of what he would do. But you have kind words for the president, considering the challenging times that we live in. Even though he has low approval ratings, you believe this was still the right thing. If you had to make the decision based on what we know now, if you were the president there, do you think you would have done the same thing?
Well, it's a setting that's almost a null set, which is if we knew that Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction, and if he had complied with the United Nations resolutions to allow IAEA inspectors into his country, why we wouldn't be having this conversation. We wouldn't have been having the UN sanction him. We wouldn't have had the U.S. angry. I mean, these things wouldn't have happened. So it's kind of a null set. It's impossible.
Am I the only one that's thinking that in all the build-up to the war, that those weapons of mass destruction got moved to Syria?
It's possible,
right?
It's entirely possible. But then the question you ask is, well, if we knew what we knew now, what would we have done? Well, if you mean by that, if he was complying with UN resolutions, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
I keep showing the Democrats, and I debated your old friend Rocky Anderson in Salt Lake over the weekend, and I show all the Democrats, they all made the same case as the president. All of them. They all voted for the war. Voted to fund the war, which is their constitutional authority. They have the power of the purse. And yet now they say all the things, oh, I never would have done this. Isn't there some hypocrisy? Are they playing politics with war, meaning the people on the left?
Well, it's one of the things that's most frustrating to me is I go back to something that Senator Vandenberg of Michigan said a long time ago, which is politics ends at the water's edge.
I love that line.
It's supposed to. And I'm afraid that Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid have gone beyond that water's edge, and it's not. I don't think it's helping them.
We're not supposed to have a debate in this country about policy that many feel is not working in this country?
Well, of course we're to have that debate.
Hey, by the way, I have
Nancy
some good
Pelosi
news.
Go to Syria, that was a mistake.
We're going to take it up in just a moment.
The governor's wife is going to join us.
Well, she'll join us in a moment. We'll toss it first to Greta Van Susteren telling us what's coming up right after Hannity and Combs at 10 Eastern. Greta.